We want to send a special thank you to Bailey Pottery Equipment and Ceramics Supply for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. At Bailey, you get the very best products along with extensive product information and excellent prices. In every line of equipment, you'll find functional features that teachers and professional potters have come to depend on. At the Bray, our Bailey gas kilns are the preferred choice among artists who create large work because they're easy to fire and very reliable. If you want to go big, go Bailey. For more information, visit baileypottery.com. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 407 of the podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'm back from my paternity leave, and I wanted to thank Jen and Sarah, Brian and Lindsay for all coming on the show as guest hosts. Also wanted to thank their partners for sharing their experiences being parents and how they create work-life balance, and basically how you keep it all together while trying to raise little ones. Also wanted to take a minute to thank the folks that have donated to our show. We are listener supported, so I'd like to thank Gail Husted, Jocelyn Romano, and Nora Stone for their recent donations. If you'd like to get involved yourself and join the Red Clay Rambler community, you can do that at talesofaredclayrambler.com/donate. Today on the show, I talk with Dustin Yager. He is a potter based in New York City that sells under the brand Ceramics in Theory. He makes humorous compositions on his porcelain pots by layering text and decals over gestural underglaze painting. In our interview, we talk about the ideas behind both his sculptural work and pots, as well as how he's found community in the city. To see examples of his work, you can go to ceramicsintheory.com. Or to see his sculptural work, you can go to dustinyager.com. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is how larger sculptural works have been distilled into pots. So we're going to kind of take the listener on that path. So let's start with the earlier sculptural work. And this would have been in like 2013, 14. You can correct my dates if I'm off here. But there's a piece called Trash Can. So can you describe that work and how it lives in space?
Yeah, I think it's called Trash Can. It's motivational, and it's about 36-inch tall porcelain trash can, because I like jokes about pottery, right? Like you shouldn't make a trash can out of porcelain of all things. So I thought that would be a funny kind of vessel to make for this show called Sexual Politics that was at Northern Clay Center about 2013, I think, like you said. So it's this trash can that has an inlaid drawing of me and an ex-boyfriend taking a mirror selfie. And it's sitting in front of a large, cheap mirror from IKEA. And then on the other side, horizontally from the mirror, is a roll of drawing paper. And the invitation to the audience was to come in and write a love letter to a current lover or a former lover, or an apology or some kind of heartfelt note. And then your note would stay hanging on the wall until the next person came in, tore your note away, threw it away, and wrote a note themselves. So that's how it exists in space.
And talk to me about this process almost this cathartic process that you're presenting for people, that they can think about an ex-lover, write something down and throw it away. This is almost like a spiritual ritual in the form of throwing a piece of paper in the trash. So what's the core of that idea?
Hmm. And a bit about privacy, right? Like, what can you stand to display after you walk away, after it's maybe no longer associated with you, but is there for someone else to read and identify with? And I think that show was important for talking about queer themes in ceramics now, or at that time. And but kind of like I've always been a little bit hesitant to be pigeonholed too. So can there be a piece that is able to depict queer lovers, queer themes, but also say like, well, love is such a, I don't like that slogan, but that this show that sort of separates queer desire from other desires also has room for all of the emotion, right? That queer or straight or poly or any permutation of it is sort of about the same emotions and can all be involved there. So maybe that's sort of the crux of it.
Well, I think about the drawing too on the trash can itself. At first, I couldn't tell it was a selfie. I thought that you guys were brushing your teeth, like that you were sitting or standing in a bathroom. It's you and a person with your shirt off. So it's this intimate moment, but not in a, it felt to me like intimate, like in a mundane intimate, not in a sexual intimate, which I think showing that form of like comfortability in a public space is almost more rare than showing sex in a public space. And that's what drew me into that piece is it's sweet. Like the whole thing is sweet.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and that was a really sweet moment with Antonio. And he yeah, it is that kind of intimate thing. And maybe, this was like my 20s living in Chicago when that was the vibe, then and at that time. And I don't know, maybe it was particular to that queer scene or that queer moment, that lifestyle, I suppose, which is what anyone maybe seeks to represent in their work is, right? This is my lifestyle. These are my values. This is my world.
Are you comfortable talking about love in general? Because I have some
uh,
questions.
um, we'd have to, we can dial in my therapist onto this call. That's fine. I think I was also going to say about that piece that the mirror, I presented a couple of pieces at Northern Clay Center that had large mirrors involved because I like that it involves the viewer, right? And it doesn't separate like this world of the art is the same world that you're participating in. So this scene about queer love and affection is the same world that you're participating in. But also, I guess, has an element of like censorship at the time of being complicit in the transition of that message from display to hidden.
Yeah, and there's something about the vulnerability of reading someone else's love story and then crumpling it up. Like it's very satisfying to crumple something up when it's yours, but when it's someone else's, like you're not erasing it, but you're destroying it. So there's something to me about that feels this, like I can understand what it's like for you to love someone because I've loved someone, but I can't really understand. And that was the question I wanted to talk about with love is that there's like all these different types of love. There's romantic love, but there's also an empathy that you can have for someone else's love. So can you talk in general about how you want to encourage empathy in the viewer by showing your love? Because you're showing intimate moments from your life. Like you're letting people in on your sort of past love story, but you're really creating a seed of empathy in the other person. So tell me about how that works, and then tell me if that works. Like, do you think people, when they saw it, do you think they had that reaction?
I don't know. I wouldn't speculate, I guess, on people's reactions, but I think that what you describe of of interacting with someone else's story in that way, of reading it or appreciating it on the wall and then choosing to remove it or not. That's a roller coaster, right? So when you're going through that, like that is a pretty heartfelt thing because it is something that a lot of people, not everyone maybe, can relate to. Um, and that's a response that I like, right? That moment where you need to decide this is for me or this isn't for me, choosing to engage deeper. What kind of person would this be for? Or what would I have to experience to appreciate or engage with something like this differently? I think is an exploration that I like. Hearing you talk about about my work, like I'm showing moments of tenderness or love, is so not usually how I think about my work, the pottery work or this other work, the sculptural pieces. And also in that show were these illustrated porcelain plates with intimate pictures on them sent through gay hookup and dating apps, which is, I think, is part of the gay ecosystem of dating and romance, right? So at the same time that there's these moments of tenderness, there's also these moments of eroticism, but alienation too. And I think about exploring that is more interesting to me, I guess, because you can explore tenderness in a Hallmark store. I'm interested in fleshing out the whole emotional range a little bit more.
That series on your website, you call it Rimware, which I think is the best name for a pottery series. So people should go check it out for sure. With that series, or with that show, you've got like lust on one hand and love on the other hand. And when you talk about lust being alienating, or like that experience of sending images back and forth through apps, which part of it's alienating? Like, tell me more about that.
I think there's elements of it that are just objectifying, right? Of like, do you just exist to be a piece of flesh to another person? And if that's what you're both looking for, that's great, love connection. But sometimes that's not, right? And I think we've learned a lot since then that those advances are not always respectful or wanted, right? And can really go into some nastier places.
Yeah, and I feel like the dating apps in general, I mean, I guess I met my wife. I have to say I don't have a lot of first-person experience with them because I met my wife right before they really blew up. But they're like the generation that's a little younger than you and I have really only dated on dating apps. Like it is ubiquitous across society that people meet online, especially in the pandemic. Like it's not like people are going out and meeting face to face. So there's some other parts of that series where you can tell like someone sent a dick pic, but then the word like attachments will be at the top. Like you reference the digital space on the ceramic space, which I think is interesting when the digital goes onto the pot as decoration. So how did you compositionally, I mean, there were lots of plates in that wall hanging, but how do you think about composition in terms of letting the person know like it's a digital picture or it comes from a digital picture?
I've thought of those as the first time I displayed them, there was 12. This Minneapolis Boys Cycle, I called it, that was shown in Chicago for the first time. And it was really as a piece that comes together because some of them are in that text message space and maybe display that the edges of the camera or the keyboard or a subject line or that attachments line or something. And some of them are just cropped out to be just the image. So I think that context of it being a dick pic, you can kind of zoom in and zoom out, right? Of like experiencing it as a photograph and experiencing it as a text message and as an exchange happens when you see the full suite of them. But on their own, they can also just be a portrait.
When I think about porcelain, this is like historical medium that has a lot of potency that I think has been questioned a lot lately. Like people are thinking about like what's the historical baggage of porcelain, and relating it to earthenware, which is something that's like very utilitarian, but also I'm thinking about images of sex, and I can find you tons and tons and tons of Greek and Roman images of sex on terracotta, but for some reason, like in the porcelain era later down the road, like I just don't think of that. Like I don't have that same association. So do you think that there's some power in the material, or what is the power in the material you're looking to use by using porcelain?
I've thought for a long time, the work is really about propriety, about who and what is allowed to display this kind of image and to whom, right? When is it that you have to take that plate off the wall because someone in particular is coming over and can't see that, while maybe 98% of my friends are fine with that. But when you have to consider what that says about yourself, and if you're comfortable revealing that to other people, is an interesting dynamic to bring into your domestic space of display. But so I think about propriety is really tied to porcelain, then, this material that brings with it connotations of status and class and display, but in a very particular culturally loaded sort of way. My journey to porcelain was much more pragmatic, I guess, in that when I wanted to start these inlay drawings, I needed a way to get a crisp, clean, smooth line surface that stoneware couldn't do. So not only could I do that inlay process with the porcelain, but it provided a papery white background for these kinds of drawings. So I started with porcelain in undergrad, but really right after, since 2007 or 8, I've just been porcelain all the time. But a lot of the work that I buy is actually terracotta. I have a lot of red pots in my house.
So you talk about these drawings that we should describe. They're almost like a mishima technique, like an inlay.
Yeah.
And it's very fine line quality. And there's one thing that you do on some of the work that I love, which is that you draw hair, but then you gold luster over top of that. And there's something about this like delicate line quality beside the gold luster that is just like so luxurious. So how do you think that you raise status through gold luster with an image like that? Because it's usually like pubic hair, some type of hair that's around something sexual.
The first dick plates that I made actually didn't have gold luster on them, and they were terrible. They came out looking so unfinished and unframed and cold, and I thought it was a funny idea to make them. I made myself laugh, which is one of my goals, but they weren't good. And then I thought, I'll put some gold luster on here and see what happens. And it really finished the thing by just putting gold luster around as a frame, not on the body. And I don't know if I particularly contributed that to it being gold luster, but just that it needed some other compositional element in that case to finish that piece. I think the pieces you're talking about where the gold luster becomes butt hair is a little bit about, I guess, the way some people fetishize body hair like that, or celebrate body hair. And another funny mixing of this thing that's just supposed to be the Mycen curly cues on your hair and your lipstick and your nail polish becoming this sexual fetish object.
And I think as a culture, we American ceramics, we fetishize porcelain, or at least when I was coming up through school, people talked about porcelain like it was a magical material.
Totally.
And I think that it can have that power, but it doesn't necessarily have to. But then when you put gold luster, you show gold luster to anyone Like, doesn't matter if they're a potter, not a potter. You could show gold luster to my grandmother, and it means value. You know, like gold is just like this inherent thing that we have that means value. So I love those plates. I thought they were beautiful. There's something about, I've never thought of beauty as a straight man. I've never thought of beauty in that situation. And it was amazing. I was like, wow. So there was definitely something to that choice.
Great. The gay agenda, mark one off for Ben Carter.
Well, I wanted to shift and talk about the collage forms, which is a different body of work made with some custom decals that you are printing. So can you describe, the series has many pieces, so can you just pick one piece and maybe describe the form and then how you're decorating it?
Oof. Yeah, we can talk about. I finished a piece last summer that was in a show in Buffalo, so I can talk about this form that was. I tend to make these forms now just when I have an invitation to a show for something, because I'm just so swamped in pottery production business most of the time. But I love to make them and to think about them and to see them coming together in my studio next to the text-based work and other drawings is really exciting to me. So the piece I made last year was for a show called Pleasure Cruise. That had queer themes to it. And I made a piece that was simultaneously an iceberg, the opposite of a pleasure cruise, and an ocean liner, the Titanic, right? And it also had a couple of teapot spouts that were smokestacks from a ship, but also making jokes about porcelain, pottery, fetishization of the functional object, things like that. So it's a piece that's about 18 inches long and maybe 12 inches wide and 20 inches tall-ish, that comes up into this mountain shape with different hand-built textures around it. And the decal images that I put on pieces like this usually pull from some pop culture themes and some images from my life as well. So there's always like personal resonance with it and meme reference and current events references to it. Ecological collapse and climate change being one of them, talking about an iceberg in the first place. And then just other memes. Some SpongeBob is there, and Oprah's interview with Harry and Meghan was there, and Little Nas X is there, and Jane Lynch saying, I'm going to create an environment that's so toxic, that's actually about creating an environment that's so toxic in this case. So
what I love about that way of decorating or thinking about surface and form is it's very different than image making. You know, like the viewer is really hit with a lot of sensations, visual sensations at the same time, you know? And I think as humans, when we see collage or when we see images that are set up in this way, our brain is trying to figure out, like, how does this relate? Like, how does Oprah relate to a meme that you posted? Or how does this all work? So can you talk about how, as the maker, you're thinking about creating meaning or a message when you have like so many images? I mean, I didn't count how many images, but there's, I don't know, 50, 60, there's tons of images all over this object.
Yeah. And what you said earlier about taking those text messages and putting them on porcelain is also part of the joke, right? Whether it's explicit words or images or sexual urges, I like taking things that are supposed to be fleeting, like TikTok memes and tweets, and freezing them on porcelain, right? Like that's the big joke to me. And when I'm making those compositions, I usually pick out a theme or two and then expand images around those. So there might be the theme of ecological danger represented in a couple different ways. Some of the relationships are purely on color, that Oprah was wearing this lovely lavender sweater, right? So she can go in the pink area of this piece. And some of the images are really the same, right? So there's different little fish characters from SpongeBob who I think kind of function as the stand-in for people. These are just like the innocent bystander Americans who don't see the wave coming. Or the Queen of England is there a couple times because of her prominence and the royal family, blah, 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 but also the role of colonialism in how we've gotten to this current state. So I tend to order my decals, and I order a lot of them, and I order extras, and I order different images in different sizes so that I can put them on the pot in a really improvisational way. So I might have a few key images that I know about where they're going to go, and I know that I want them 3 or 4 or 6 inches tall or whatever. And then I rotate the piece and have my crock pot of warm water to keep applying decals until it feels like it's approaching finished. And I actually was looking through, and I build artist talks and slideshows. I have some pictures of these flower pots I made for a show in 2009, I think, that are all inlaid drawings in a collage style. So it's interesting. I'd forgotten I made these. It was so interesting to see that collage storytelling aesthetic that came out more fully when I started doing collages in 2013, 14 until now. I just didn't have the image making technology that I wanted at the time. So I was drawing and tracing everything from printer paper onto my pots, but it's the same way of thinking.
And it's interesting when that technique speeds up, like when the decal is in hand as opposed to having to trace and draw, that you can improvise faster and looser, and I think in a way that is more fun.
It's a lot of fun.
And the objects look fun. I mean, that's one of the things. There is a sense of humor in all the work, but there was this older piece that was part of the collage that I didn't write down the name, but you've got like Fox News microphones beside a dick, beside something else completely seemingly unrelated, but there's like a visual joke there. But then there's other parts of this collage work that are a little more hard hitting, like ecological disaster. So there's kind of nice to have the humor mixed in to keep it light. I think it's like the sweetness makes the medicine go down kind of thing, Mm-hmm. So I love that series of work. It's beautiful objects.
Thank you. I working in this way that references memes and pop culture and news also means the pieces date very quickly, but also very specifically. The evergreen ship that blocked the Suez Canal is on the piece that I made last year, and it's old news, right? I have a piece I made before that from the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, and it's like, what was that woman's name, right? She's all over this piece, but things just move so quickly, making it, in that history of porcelain, right, a snapshot of our time, but also something that has a shelf life of about 3 months.
Now, in this pandemic, time has been so weird. Like when you mentioned the Suez Canal, I was like, oh, right, that happened. Like I completely forgot. That was what started the discussion about the global supply chain. Like that was the first media event where people said, you're not going to get your whatever order because that ship is blocking that canal, which was a big deal at the time.
Yeah, and ties it to that we are limited, we don't have infinity of everything. Everything has to exist in the world and move from point A to point B. I'm glad you find these pieces fun. After I finished that piece in the middle of the pandemic, was like, wow, this is maybe the most cynical piece I've made in a very long time. And speaking of that composition that mixes all of these images and themes, I think they can be very stream of consciousness, right? That we exist in this world where Twitter is pinging you with news and you're getting pictures of your newborn baby and you're getting stock market updates, but you're also getting jokes and this new song just came out and you're still at work for 5 more hours, right? So that mix of quick culture that is bombarding us always is the context that these are made in, that I'm just looking out my window and reflecting that emotional state when I make these too.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Scut is a proud sponsor of the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler. Scut Ceramic Products has been in manufacturing equipment for potters since 1953. Their reputation as a pioneer in innovative kiln design continues with the 4th generation of this family-owned business. Their KilnMaster touchscreen controller offers a sleek, smartphone-like interface that is both intuitive and packed with powerful tools that allow potters to easily program, diagnose, and remotely monitor their kilns. With 5 dedicated kiln technicians on staff and the most comprehensive network of distributors across the globe, you can be assured that Scut will be there for you before and after the sale. For more information on their line of kilns, visit scut.com. This episode of the podcast is also sponsored by Amoco Brent. For the past 100 years, Amoco Brent has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns. With over 3,000 products, Amoco Brent's top priority is making sure that all of their customer needs are met. From the professional to the student and everyone in between, their high-quality materials enable you to make your best work. To learn more, check them out at amoco.com or on Instagram and Facebook at Amoco Brent. You can also show them how you use Amoco by sharing your work online with the hashtag HowIAmoco. Let's pivot and bring in this conversation about language in pots, like the production work you do with, these are porcelain pots with abstract color painted on them and then text-based statements over top of them. So to me, it feels like that these pots, there's an immediacy about the painting in the background, but then often the text is words like "fuck that," or like something that's like the type of thing you might say in frustration, or something that you're looking for a release. Like these pots very much feel like release. So can you talk about how that sculptural work before led up to this body of pots that are your production wares?
I think that I don't think that's chronological. The pots were around at the same time, if not before, at least in development. They've been much more refined since I really started making them in 2008, 9, 10, 11, probably. So
yeah, so it sounds like they're an additional idea that's been flowing in the background. But can you talk about the release aspect of it? Like that's like you're catching a moment in which there's an exclamation of emotion.
I think that they've landed there. I would say that the impulse to start the sexual drawings on porcelain pots and poke fun at the cozy world of handmade ceramics was the inspiration point for both of these not exactly subversive, but controversial or rebellious impulses in my work in right after undergrad. So I had started making work that was going to be about functionality in some way, but kind of negating the coziness or the craftedness and the comfort of handmade pottery, and sometimes the function as well. So that just came out in these directions of illustrations and stories and text that has sort of branched off. But I really like seeing those pieces next to each other too, because I think that the rapidity of the mark making does hold them together in some way. So the pots that say fuck this and fuck that and piss off um, are about that kind of release. And like I mentioned, that like broadening of the range of expression that's available in the handmade pottery market. Or and really in the design market, right? Of like, if I always think about pots as like expressions of your identity and your values and your personality. And that has a range from Target to handmade, right? And that's a beautiful world. So my pieces just allow someone to say, part of me is a little edgy, as they put that on a shelf, or give it as a gift, or however else they're going to use it.
So when you started putting text, you're writing text. So my handwriting is horrible. Like if I tried to write on a pot, people would not understand what it is. So did you have to like practice your handwriting to make it legible, or is that just your handwriting?
That is mostly just my handwriting. I have a good F. Fortunately, my F comes out very fluidly, or else I'd have a different career.
So you worked at the Northern Clay Center for how long?
I was there for 5 years.
5 years. Okay. So you saw a lot of pots. Like that gallery moves a lot of work, and it moves a lot of work that, as you talked about, like the cozy handmade, like things that we think of as like very earnest makers making pots for use that are going to go in people's homes. And it seems like that you're making the counterpoint to that. Like you mentioned, is it's almost like a rebellious impulse. But I wanted you to talk a little bit about where you think functional pots are now, because you've just seen so many pots come through that gallery. And then how do you think yours fits into that?
Working at Northern Clay Center was really, really great. It was such a good way for anyone to go in and see work by more than 60 mostly functional potters on any given Tuesday. You can walk in the door and handle this work and ask questions about it. It's really, really remarkable. Plus their exhibitions program that brings other artists through who aren't represented in the gallery, but are showing pots and sculpture and conceptual work and everything under the sun. So that was a huge part of my education, I think, of being around all of those pots and learning about careers in ceramics, that these people feed their kids from pots. I don't know this. What's the question? The state of ceramics today?
Yeah.
The state of pottery?
Let me make an easier comparison. Like that feels very Minnesota to me. Like that place feels Minnesota. You're now in Brooklyn, which New York City pots and Minnesota pots are only similar in that they're ceramics. So I want you to talk a little bit about that transition, moving to New York City and then developing a line of work that you can pay the bills off of, living in a pretty expensive, well, less expensive now in the pandemic, but usually a really expensive city in America.
Yeah, we're expensive, I would say, is accurate to describe New York. It's definitely like a American studio pottery vibe that is strong in the Midwest and other art centers, right? And Brooklyn is a little bit, and New York is different pottery style from that. I think when I moved to Minnesota, I like to poke fun at brown pots and functional cozy pots. I suppose I still do. But now, like, I'm the Minnesota potter. Like, now I'm the traditional one, right? Which is an interesting turn. And my pots are totally influenced from being around that place of finely crafted, sort of emphasis on the wheel, values of things that is pretty straightforward, I think, in my workflow process. but I don't have anything real bad to say about New York pottery or urban pottery or however you want to call it as a trend. I think that we say a lot, pottery is a big tent and that the everyone deserves access to the miracles and joys of this material. Living those values is different, right? Because my taste is definitely tuned to a different kind of pottery than I see produced and promoted a lot. But I think that's just a different level of taste. And maybe what I've had to adjust to most is working at a craft gallery like Northern Clay Center. Um, it's easy to forget that there's other stores, I suppose, that I think if you don't come through traditional pottery training, maybe Northern Clay Center and craft galleries in general, we shouldn't single out them, maybe working or selling your work through fine craft galleries seems like the furthest thing from what you would want, right? You set your sights on Bloomingdale's and you set your sights on interior design boutiques rather than the craft world. And that has been maybe one of the biggest changes here.
And I can see that in the attitude of the work. You mentioned that there's this scale from Target being designed to handmade in ceramics. Like you can make a living at any point in that scale. But in New York City, you can see amazing design shops. And then you can also see, actually, there's not a ton of craft in New York City anymore, but there's some. But I feel like the New York City potters that I see, like the edginess in your pots seems to fit, in my mind, the New York City attitude. So let's talk about who's buying these pots. Like, do you feel like that New Yorkers look at your work and relate to that more? Or do you see any sort of pattern in who's buying the work? The work that has the text that like, fuck this or fuck that, the sort of rebellious attitude work, who's buying those?
I think that I haven't, because I was really developing this body of work while I had a full-time job, I didn't have to focus on marketing it and like targeting different places too specifically. So I was able to build up a web store and some wholesale relationships and some consignment relationships with craft galleries in different cities that has been pretty robust and has fluctuated and changed, and people come in and out, and that's the way of the world. Um, so for the work that I make, I think fortunately it can sit on the edge of all of that, that it's traditional enough in its materials and making that it can appeal to segments of a fine craft market, but pop or trendy enough that it can also appeal to segments of a design gift boutique market as well.
Because one of the other things I think about this work is that it is painterly. Like I've focused on the text so far, but it's essentially abstract color field painting on pots. And then the text lives on top of that. So let's talk about the background, the colors. Because I think it was on your Instagram, you posted a bunch of like paintings you'd been looking at. And they're amazing. Oh, yeah. So let's think about like who your painting influences are and then how that gets into the work.
Yeah, I don't know nothing about painting. I made black and white work for 5 years, 6 years was probably all I made was black or white or clear. And in part because I had a full-time job, right? And could only really make the things that had been ordered and sold. I think I lived in New York for 3 years before I had the creative space to reach for that bottle of orange and start to play around with underglaze and figure out a way that it worked, and then slowly start to expand the forms that it can live on, and realize that that colorful work has a different voice, right? It can hold longer phrases, where the black and white work, I tried to write other things on it. Fuck this and fuck that is what fits on in that voice of work. The colorful work has a different voice. So this spring there's a show of Joan Mitchell's color field painting in Baltimore that I'm so excited to take the train down to and see these Joan Mitchell paintings that are large, sometimes 3 or 4 panel, 16-foot long, enormous paintings. I really love Joan Mitchell. But I like Willem de Kooning a lot, and I love the smushy, smeary pink and gray and Philip Guston a lot. I really like color a lot.
And there's something about the gesture, it's not like you're putting like a very small orange stripe. It's like it looks to me like you're dipping it in and you're just making a swipe across the pot, which is this feeling, also a feeling of release. I mean, that's the thing. Somehow I get it in the color work. Maybe it's because of the contrast. I see the gesture of the painting a little more than the black and white work. Somehow the black, when it's all the same color, I don't want to say it flattens out, but like I lose the strokes on top of each other. But when you've got orange beside green, beside, something else, like my eyes are tingly, or my brain is tingly, which I love that about that work.
Thank you. It tingles for me too. And you're right. When I started working with that, I told myself that I can't be precious about the color. And a struggle of my adult life has been to like work against the austerity of growing up on a farm, right? Of growing up with not in need by any means, but not in a abundance mind state either. So working with that orange, that's my favorite color, and being able to splash it around has been, try not to let money be the problem here. If we can't afford a bottle of underglaze, like we have bigger problems than just the price of underglaze.
So can you talk about finding a home in New York? And I mean like a cohort, like finding people to hang out with, finding a community in New York?
Ooh, I love the Northern Clay Center. I did not love Minneapolis. So I needed to leave that region while I was still relatively young to go somewhere that I wanted to live, right? I'd moved for college and I moved for that job, and I'd never moved somewhere just because I want to live there. So I wanted to get to Brooklyn, and I thought, maybe I'll never touch clay again, but I need to go live in Brooklyn. Unfortunately, clay came along, and I started teaching at Greenwich House Pottery right away, which is that bridge from the craftier American studio pottery world into a different a ceramic scene that has more artists from this part of the country. And so that was really helpful as a grounding place to know that there are other people with a shared vocabulary and shared values from there. And from there, I started teaching at a studio in Park Slope called Gasworks. That has been another really great community and really great place to meet new people in clay. I worked a museum job for a few months when I was here. There's just so many people. And that's what I really like about living in urban places, that there's people on the street. And I didn't experience that in Minneapolis the same way. And that there's a lot of people who aren't from here. There's a lot of people who are new here. So everyone is kind of looking to connect, that I didn't feel in Minneapolis in the same way either. I'm sure some of that's my fault, but it has been really nice to be here for those reasons. And maybe more than, I don't know if I have a super strong clay group of people here. I've ended up meeting a lot of like theater people, strangely.
I feel this is a total tangent, but when Broadway shut down, like I felt bad. Like I felt like this is a whole group of people. Like, what are they going to do? Because there's hundreds of people, that actors or crew or anything, that are a part of that whole thing. So I hope that they made it through, that the theater world made it through the pandemic. I know it's starting to open up a little bit now.
And so many that are gig workers, that are independent contractors. And if you don't work, that's it.
Well, to wrap up, can you leave your Instagram so that people, and your shop, so that people could find the work?
Yeah, you can find me at Ceramics in Theory on Instagram is the functional work, and It Must Be Destiny is another account I have. ceramicsintheory.com is a great resource. And I want to tell you, I'll be in the Mug Madness tournament at Saltstone Ceramics in March. I don't know when this comes out, in March.
And one more question, Ceramics in Theory, like the theory part.
Yeah.
Are you at home like reading theory books?
I don't read a lot of fiction, I'll say that. Well, I grabbed that brand, that website, when I was in grad school, because I thought it might be a home for ceramic production, but also for critical writing sorts of things. Yeah. But and in grad school, I really looked at material culture studies. So that theory of how do we communicate by the objects we surround ourselves with is the theory that's still there.
It's such a memorable name. Like
thank you.
It was a good choice, because every time, it's funny, I had to look up your last name because now in my mind you're Ceramics in Theory. And I was like, what is his last name?
By their handle, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. This has been a pleasure to talk. It's good to see you again.
Thanks, Ben. Great to see you too. Congrats on your baby.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to thank Dustin for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to catch up with him. At the end, he mentioned that he is taking part in this year's Mug Madness tournament. This is a 64-person single elimination bracket-style tournament. The top prize is $500, and you can help decide that prize by voting each day at the Saltstone Instagram feed. That's Saltstone Ceramics. You can also find out more about the tournament by going to their website. That's saltstoneceramics.com. Also wanted to thank today's sponsors, the first of which is Bailey. They make a variety of ceramic products, including large-scale gas kilns. If you want to go big, go Bailey. For more information, visit baileypottery.com. I'd also like to thank Amico Brent, who has been creating ceramic supplies for our community, ranging from underglazes to electric kilns for over 100 years. To find out more, visit amico.com. And last but not least, I wanted to thank Scut Ceramic Products. Their KilnMaster touchscreen controller is an intuitive tool that helps you to program, diagnose, and remotely monitor your kiln. To find out more, visit scut.com. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.
We respectfully acknowledge and honor all Indigenous communities whose lands we reside on in the United States, and recognize that we are uninvited guests on the occupied, unceded, and ancestral lands of over 500 nations indigenous to North America. By acknowledging and reflecting upon the contemporary lived experiences and histories of the Indigenous peoples here and globally, we may begin to take essential steps towards creating a more equitable world. Learn more through the hashtag Honor Native Land initiative of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, and consider contributing to Indigenous-led organizations doing important work to further health and wellness, sovereignty, and self-determination of the first people of the lands you reside. This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network, an extension of the Archie Bray Foundation for the Ceramic Arts. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.